Thank you, Barry. At this time, I would like to acknowledge our sponsors, WW Plumbing, Yoeli Lefkowitz, SHB Loans, Steve Heshko, Jack Jaffe, Michael, Signature Roofing, Joel Mandel, and Certified Lumber, Yidi Würzberger. We also would like to thank Sidley Weinstock for his dedication for tonight's event. Leon Goldenberg, before I start, I would like to acknowledge Assemblyman Rosenthal, who is currently here with us. He came here to show support. We've spoken before about all the important laws and regulations and guidelines that is now in Albany. Is a very, very good friend of the Frum and Heimische community. So we would like to thank him very much, Assemblyman Rosenthal. Thank you. Leon Goldenberg has a unique perspective. He has been the Chief Executive Officer of Goldmont Realty for over 30 years. He possesses a wealth of experience and consistent successes. In his role as CEO, Leon maintains his founding vision while setting future goals for the company. But Leon is also an Oscan, a very dedicated Oscan. Leon serves on numerous boards. He is first vice chairman of the board of directors of Kojo of Flatbush and the chairman of the board at Shalom Torah Centers. He serves as a member of the board of trustees for Agudas Israel of America. Very, very involved. I've seen him all the time at every event, at every meeting where Askanis is needed, Leon is there. In addition, Leon sits on boards of various businesses in the healthcare field, giving him a broad range of experience. From my private sources, I can tell you that Leon is more of an Oscan than a businessman. Leon.
Shh. So for those who don't know, I'm Leon Goldenberg, who was on the cover of Ami magazine. But before I go on, I do want to acknowledge, you heard from Mark Weprin. Mark and I go back many years, and I talk to Mark on a regular basis. He's, especially when many of us feel now's the time to strike out and take revenge, he says, hold on a second. He knows the state. I will not say anything complimentary about his former boss, the governor, who I consider a socialist, and I know he doesn't like to hear that, but it is clearly the governor's fault that we are where we are, Mark, whether you like it or not. Daniel Rosenthal, who left, is new in Albany, but he's going to be a star. Ah, he stayed for the speech. Aaron Weeder from Muncie, and eventually Rockland County, Legislature, and hopefully soon to be in the state. We spoke about landlords. Nobody likes landlords. My wife doesn't like me. So a few weeks ago, I wrote a letter to Ami because there were certain things that I thought were very important to get across. The interview that I gave was as a private citizen. It was not with any of the hats that I wear. Even though the front cover said, "A good activist," I spoke as a private citizen, as a landlord, as an owner of property. So I think that's very important to get across. Shh. I think what came out, besides getting it over the head from many people, getting it from many politicians who seem to consider me persona non grata, after that, and I won't say which ones are very upset, but there are many that are upset. because I told the truth. I told the truth. Now, I did not pick out the cover. It's time to leave New York, but we'll discuss that. But everybody that read the article understands what we as landlords are going through. And before that, everybody said all landlords are rich and don't understand that that can end. The implication of staying in New York or leaving. So let's first talk about out of town, and then I'll come back to New York. While the majority of my holdings are in New York and multifamily residential, I am out of town for over 30 years. I started investing in Texas in 1987. I was 12 years old. And in the last few years, we've been going to other places throughout the country also. But I do have somebody in my office traveling every second week looking at property all over the country. And we're trying to focus on 3 to 4 areas. There are some people that can be today in Ohio, tomorrow in Texas, and next week in Alabama. I don't think that works for us. We want to learn a market. We want to understand the market. But he was recently on a tour of a property. And when they take you on a tour, many times they'll pile up, especially because you get a lot of out-of-towns, they pile everybody up together. And there were 7 different groups touring the property at that time. 5 of them were wearing yarmulkes. So basically, the New York real estate residential market has, for the most part, chosen to leave New York, whether they want to hear it or not, but the choice is being made by the dollars. And those dollars will eventually hurt New York. But you have to understand the different markets. There are some people that sometimes are lucky. They buy, the market goes in their favor, or a bunch of other guys like us show up and drive up the price, and the first guy, if he's smart enough, gets out. And you don't learn a market in one trip. Focus on a market, but don't forget what you know. New York, what was the cause of the legislation? I think Mark really put it down. We're living in a very progressive city, in a very progressive state, where especially after AOC defeated Joe Crowley, and this is an important lesson. He spoke about the DA's race in Queens. There are 2.4 million people living in Queens. 2.4 million people living in Queens. How many people decided the race? 1 million? 1.25 million? The winner, Melinda Katz, who won by 60, 59 votes, depends who you listen to, which means any shul that you daven in could have made the difference. She had a total of 31,000 votes. Out of 2.4 million people, 31,000 people voted. How much of a difference can we make if we register as Democrats, whether you like to hear it or not, because you're living in New York, or at least in New York City, anybody living in New York City, unless you live in Staten Island, but register as Democrats and vote, and vote, and vote. Are there opportunities in New York? But let's go back to, before we get to that, I skipped a little bit. What else were the causes? In my opinion, something that we're all involved in, gentrification. Gentrification. The minorities, for the most part, have been driven out of certain neighborhoods. Let's be realistic. They've been driven out. Most of you don't know, but the African-American population between 2000 and 2010 went down in New York City by 8%. As people have moved into areas that were once people were afraid to tread in, where are those people going? They're being driven out. So this is something that they do fear. And it's a real fear. And let's not minimize it. The buyouts, you know, we're buying out people sometimes when they're in court, and they're at a disadvantage, and we can buy them out for $10,000, $20,000, where are they going with that? Some of the stuff we've done has clearly been Chilul Hashem. When you constantly see landlords on the front cover of the papers, and many of them are from, that's a problem. So it's up to us to try to change that. It's up to us to try to change that. One thing, talking about our disagreements with progressives, I hear it on a constant basis, and I see emails and I see letters to the editor. LGBT. We're against it, we're opposed to it. It's the law. It's law. Same-sex marriage is the law. Whether we want to acknowledge it, we don't want to acknowledge it. Why are we fighting something that was lost? Why do I hear people saying, we're going to elect a Republican? And I remember Strobel when he ran for the state senate in Flatbush, I'm going to repeal the law. And people voted based on that. We have to pick our fights. We have to pick our fights. The fights that we can win, not the fights that we're not going to win. We need to be seen as caring not just to our community. You see in the paper Hatzalah, you see Chesed Shalemes, Misaskin, and they're wonderful organizations. But we live in New York City. We live in New York City. There are other people in New York City. Why, on Thanksgiving, when the homeless are being fed in different places, and I'm not guilty just as much as everybody else, why are we not there feeding them? Why are we not at the homeless shelters showing that they're people too and we care? How would it look if 25 Hasidic Yingaman were at a homeless shelter feeding people on Thanksgiving, bringing food to them? One small thing that I do when I see the guys sitting outside the stores, Dunkin' Donuts or any cafe, and they're looking for quarters, I will go in and I'll buy him food. He's obviously, for the most part, not Jewish, although there's one in my neighborhood that is. These are small things that we can do that can really change. Other ideas? Come forward. Opportunities in New York, let's get back to business. Opportunities in New York, there will be in time. I hate to say it, as people lose buildings and the banks get the buildings back, we're not there yet, it's going to take a while. And because the reality is that our income is going to be going down every year, because we're getting 1.5% increases. The legal battles are important, but in my opinion, we'll win some of the battles, but we're not going to win the war. We're not going to win the war. So how do we win the war? I don't think we can, but I do think that we can make a difference. That takes organizing. There's a group, R New York, which you're all invited to join, and I will send it out to the Retex to see who wants to join. Legislatively, making friends, not making enemies. Making friends. There are legislators, not in New York City so much, that do not have such a liberal base, and there are certain that we may target because we think we can beat, but for the most part, it's making friends, getting to know them, getting to explain to them what's at your business, what's going on in New York City, number one, and the harm and the damage that it will do to New York City. Let's be clear. The damage to New York City will be enormous. It will be the 1970s again. I said it before, and I will say it again. As buildings are let go, because first, the buildings that people walk away from, they're not bothering to run it properly. The banks aren't capable of running them, so there'll be a lot of that. But even in your own buildings, are you watching your dollars? 100%. Because you know that the 1.5% is not going to cover your expense increase. Forget about making more profit. So are you chinsing at times? 100%. It will lead to deterioration of the housing stock. but it will take 3 to 5 years for it to start to be noticed. And that's a long time because our political friends are worried about one thing: the next election. The next election. They're not worried about 2 years. They're not worried about 4 years. And on the state level, the next election is 2 years cycles. And that's what they're worried about. They're worried about the progressives on the left challenging them. That's what they're worried about. And you can see with how few votes can make a difference when an entire borough is controlled by 31,000 people. How many shuls in Queens could have made a difference by registering as Democrats? Because in New York City, outside of Staten Island, and I call it the 4 boroughs in Staten Island, outside of Staten Island, there are 3 council members that are Republicans out of 51. 3. One in Far Rockaway, strangely enough, and the others in Staten Island. So are you going to fight and say, I'm a Republican? Very nice, but you have no say. You have no say. In Flatbush, we want a race now for the council, 10,000 people. A district is 150,000 people. 10,000 people voted. We brought out 1,500 votes. We lost 400 from the first slide. It was a double election because they were Republicans. Oh, their message got out very well because they were Republicans. We're going to have a very difficult few years. Let's not think not, but if we come together and we get together with other business groups and with like-minded people throughout the state with a focus on the state Senate, not on the Assembly. There's nothing we're going to do in the Assembly. There are 107 Democrats out of 150 legislators in the Assembly. No bill will pass in the Assembly without having 76 Democrats. So basically, for all you Republicans out there that are in the state Assembly, you may as well take a nap. You may as well be at home working on constituent services because you're not accomplishing anything up there. And there's no chance. Relationships are really, really, really critical. And most important, we need to hear what the other side is saying, what they're complaining about, and see what it is that we can do to try to bridge the gap. Thank you all.